Right, okay, before I go into any information past no, but in here, this is what we've set out. That was a photograph. The idea of what they had is what they have. The players come in, all you need, whether you're a young child or you're playing in the Champions League final, you need football boots, socks, shin pads, shorts and a top. That's it. On that pitch, that's all you need. Everything else will be supplied for you. Do you need lockers? No. The reason a lot of clubs have lockers, you lock your stuff away, it's safe.
What is Liverpool?
Why can't they trust each other? Do you go home and lock all your belongings away? No. And that's why you don't leave lockers for, you can trust each other. Leave all your jewellery or your money, you know, you've only got a couple of £1,000 spare change, so just leave it around. But the main thing people ask about is communication. How can people communicate in the dressing room? It's easy. Football is universal. Doesn't matter what language you speak. If you see someone onside in a better position than you, what do? You pass it to them. You make space for yourself so you can get that ball back. We try and install players to hit them in between them 3 posts, okay? Not above it, or hit it. But that is what. Where is everybody from today? Where did we travel from? London, Shetland, Plymouth.
Malta.
Okay, you're with them. Malta. Malta as well. Spain. Vancouver.
Germany.
And Germany. Put your hand up if you can understand me. Well done. Well done. Now, right.
Our dugout is quite special. It's very, very unique. There isn't another one like it in the Premier League apart from Tottenham. Don't know if anyone knows what it is that's so unique about our dugout. No? I'll tell you. It's because it's shared, so both teams are together. So the home side is here, the away side is here, so they're very close together. So the two managers can hear everything each other is saying. That's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not too sure. And they also share the technical area as well, so they're literally shoulder to shoulder on a match day. Now this area is called the paddock and it's part of the main stand. The main stand is actually the oldest part of the stadium, and if you have a look at them seats up there, you'll notice they're quite different from the ones below. They are wooden, not plastic. That's because the first 18 rows are the originals from 1906 when the stadium was first built. So they are over 100 years old, those seats. If you're looking for comfort, you're probably not going to get it up there, I'll be honest. You'd have to try and get yourself a seat up here. This grey boxed in area, that is the director's box. Now they're the best seats in the house, the dark red leather ones with the armrest. That's where the owners of both teams always sit on a match day. It's where anyone important, anyone famous, any VIPs, anyone who's specially invited by the club, they will sit up there as well. Unfortunately, you can't buy a ticket to sit there. You do have to be invited by the club. It's also where long-term injured players will sit as well. So like I said, Lucas has been sat up there watching the last few games. Just above it, up here, you've got the TV entry. Now that's where all the cameras are hoisted up, put into position to film all the live televised games. They get hoisted up by a pulley system. It's just a little hook that comes down. Put all the tens of thousands of pounds worth of camera and equipment and everything on it in a little net bag, and then they hoist it up across the fingers and it gets up there and put into position. The commentator also sits up there. A lot of people are quite surprised because they think the commentator is in a glamorous box somewhere quite plush. He has to basically climb up an internal ladder over in the corner, crawl along the cavity, not quite high enough to stand, and then drop down into the commentator's box. It might be why I'm afraid of time, but it's not glamorous, trust me. This end of the stadium is the Anfield Road end, we call it the Annie Road end locally, and it's where the away fans always sit along with Liverpool fans. Now the away fans sit on the bottom tier, it goes right along the bottom tier to the pillar just under the immediate stand, which is about 3,000 seats. That's our maximum allocation that we give to away fans. Now you can see Aston Villa haven't quite taken up the full allocation. The black net separates the home supporters from the away. You just get to loop across so we don't sell all those tickets, and we put them on sale for the fans if there's any left over. Just opposite is the centenary stand. Now it's called the centenary stand because in 1992 we celebrated our 100th birthday as a club. So to celebrate, we added the top tier, we also added in the 30 executive boxes that you can see just running through the middle, and they're mostly owned by the names of the different companies that are printed underneath them. A few of the players have got boxes, Glenn Johnson, Pepe Reina, Jamie Carragher, Steven Gerrard, they've all got a box. And then most of the others, as I say, are owned by the companies printed underneath. This end of the stadium is of course the Kop. It doesn't take much of an introduction, but what we're going to do, we're going to head down there in a moment, so I'm not going to tell you too much about it right now, and I'll tell you all about the Kop when we get down there. We'll finish our tour in the Kop. Before we move on though, I'll just let you know the stadium capacity is 45,522 to be exact. Now it's nowhere near big enough for a club of Liverpool's following. We can twice fill in those games. We do need a much bigger stadium. Just not too sure at the moment whether we're going to move or whether we're going to stay here. It has not been decided as yet. What we do know at this stage, if we move, it's definitely going to be a couple of hundred yards that way behind the Anfield Road end to Stanley Park. We're going to build about 73,000 plans that moment if we move. All of this sadly would then be demolished or be knocked down, which is very sad because the history of course is a lot of people. There is one big one that we know will always remain here at Anfield, never be touched, and it is. And that's because over the years many fans who passed away have had their ashes scattered or buried on our pitch. So it's sacred ground. There's only ourselves and Everton who offer that service to the fans of all the clubs in the Premier League, and we would never build on it for that reason. So it'll become possibly a memorial garden, a green space, and then possibly a pathway that will lead down from here to the new stadium. Anyone got any questions about the stadium? It gets given that name after a war that was fought in South Africa called the Boer War. During that war, there was over 300 men from this area who travelled over, fought in a battle that took place on a big green hill called Spion Kop. That roughly translates in Dutch Afrikaner to be an vantage point or spy hill. Those 300 men tragically lost their lives defending that hill. So all the men who used to gather here on what was just a big green muddy hill back then decided to nickname it Spion Kop in their honour so that their memory would always live on. Now in 1928, the club decided to make that official, and it's when they first added on a roof and also added concrete to the Kop as well, started to make some changes. Back then, of course, it was very, very different. It held officially 28,000 people, and that was all standing. That was just officially. Unofficially, it reached many, many more in the Kop. Up to 36,000 people are reported to have been stood here. Now that is like taking every other seat that you can see in the entire stadium, pack all them people into here standing, then you'd have to add about 2,000 more on top of that. It was incredibly physical, very, very tightly packed in. When you watch all the old footage, you see them all tightly packed together, swaying. It's like a human tidal wave, constantly moving, swaying sideways, backwards, forwards. It was said that if you came into the Kop, you were stood maybe up in that corner over there, you'd probably end up finishing the game down here somewhere. You could never stay in the same spot. If you came with 5 friends, you'd no doubt lose them, but you'd leave with a new 5 friends because it was a community, the Kop, everyone looked after each other. Often people did used to faint. It was very, very common because of the mass of people all in one area. If you fainted, you were in the middle, you were at the back, there was no way a paramedic was getting to you. So what would happen, whoever was stood either side would lift you up and they would crowd surf you over the heads of the people in front. Bearing in mind it was a lot steeper back then, you were blocking people's view of the game, so you'd end up doing about 60 miles an hour by the time you got to the bottom. The paramedics would see to you and then people would literally just dive straight back into the Kop. It was just incredible. Obviously not the safest place to watch a game of football, admittedly, but it was incredibly exciting and exhilarating. The people who stood on the Kop who speak to us, the stories, the passion, the enthusiasm that they have, it's just immense for how the Kop was. But for health and safety reasons, of course, it did have to come to an end and it had to become all seated for safety. Now that was following some tragic stadium disasters that we saw all around the world in the 1980s. There was of course the Bradford City fire and there was the Heysel disaster, and then in 1989, most notable to Liverpool fans was the Hillsborough disaster. Now reportedly over 20,000 fans actually travelled and made the journey to Sheffield Wednesday's ground, a neutral ground called Hillsborough. There was a CNFA Cup semi-final against Nottingham Forest. Tragically 96 of them fans didn't return, and it was due to the incompetence of the authorities and the stewards on that day. The judge who looked into it, Lord Justice Taylor, declared a tragedy like that could not happen in any other football stadium. So all standard terraces had to be completed over the next 5 years. That gave us till 1994, and that's when we saw our last stand. Anyone remember who we played? Norwich City, do you remember the score? Do you remember the goal scorer? Put you on the spot now. Yeah, 1-0 unfortunately that day. Any other day the fans had been devastated, but on that day they weren't too bothered because all they'd really come for was a piece of history from the Kop. They brought hammers and chisels in the coats and they literally went to work on it during the match. All you could hear reportedly was the hammers, the chisels, things getting torn out, ripped out. People took with them blocks of cement that they chiselled away and lifted up and carried on the shoulders out of the doors. They took toilet seats, toilet signs, sinks off the walls, barriers. One guy on the tour said to me his mate took a big massive glass pane that was like 4 times the size of him. We just know how we got it home. But whatever they could carry went with them as a souvenir because that's what it meant to the fans. It was the end of an era. And nowadays it goes back 76 rows and it holds 12,500. Now it's not even half of what it officially used to hold, but it does still create an amazing atmosphere. The fans are still just as passionate as ever, they still sing very, very loud. It all starts here in the Kop, then the rest of the stadium will cotton on. It was recorded at the beginning of the season, it is official that we are still the loudest terrace in the Premier League. Yeah, so we're still keeping it up, we're still making orange banners, flags, so it's an amazing place to be and watch a game of football. And of course the most important thing is we can now guarantee that everyone who comes here can stay and watch the game.